Welcome to the Dante Psychology Podcast. My guest today is Thomas Zimmerman, a therapist from Ohio in the United States of America. He specializes in working with complex trauma and PTSD. He's a trainer and consultant in EMDR, which is a modality of therapy used for treating trauma. And most interestingly of all, he's the creator of 4 Blinks therapy. This is a modality of therapy that he's designed to help people heal from complex trauma. It's a form of therapy that works in a very unintuitive and different way that helps people do trauma work while feeling very little distress in the moment that they do it. To date, Thomas has provided training to over 20,000 clinicians in his 4 Blinks modality, and most of this training he has provided completely for free. Before we jump into the interview, I wanted to give a bit of an overview and provide some context on 4 Blinks therapy, because it'll make it a lot easier to understand what we're talking about later on. So before he developed 4 Blinks therapy, there was a style of therapy called flash therapy. And in flash therapy, clients would briefly interact with distressing memories for only short amounts of time in order to not get overwhelmed by them. And the goal of flash therapy was to help clients to desensitize themselves enough to this traumatic memory to where it wouldn't overwhelm them, so then they could really deep dive into this traumatic memory in another therapy modality like EMDR and fully heal and resolve this memory. Thomas took this flash therapy concept and made several adjustments to it to create what he now calls the 4 Blinks model. So if flash therapy was kind of something you would use as an introduction and a primer before moving into the more serious therapeutic work, he's taken this primer and built it out into kind of a cohesive and complete therapeutic modality that can completely resolve traumatic memories. Now, the way 4 Blinks works in practice is it has clients micro-activate a traumatic memory by only activating and looking at that traumatic memory for a fraction of a second, and then they take this micro slice of the traumatic memory that came into their awareness, they contain it mentally, and they push it out of their awareness, and then they divert their attention to a positive action or a positive stimulus. And while they engage their focus and attention on this positive stimulus, they will intermittently and purposefully blink their eyes or do some other type of action to break up their engagement of this positive stimulus into multiple individual pieces. In this interview, we're going to be covering the theory that lies underneath 4 Blinks therapy, how it can go right and how it can go wrong, what is the role of avoidance when it comes to dealing with trauma and where avoidance can be helpful and harmful. And we also go over some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about trauma and healing. And one of the most interesting points that I think we cover is how a trauma healing modality like 4 Blinks, where clients don't feel distress as they do it, how could this possibly work when so many of the traumatic processing modalities that are the most common, think things like prolonged exposure therapy and EMDR, these all involve high amounts of distress while reprocessing and while healing. So without further ado, here's Thomas Zimmerman. Thomas, before you began doing 4 Blinks, I understand that you were highly specialized in EMDR, which is another modality of therapy used for trauma and complex trauma. What were some of the limitations that you found with EMDR that led you to kind of lean more heavily into and create this 4 Blinks model of Flash?
Yeah, so EMDR is really an amazing way to work with people with trauma, but it has an admission cost. So EMDR therapy with really complex trauma can be a very difficult thing, because what we're asking people to do in EMDR therapy is tolerably activate, slow down, like all the way down, be present and notice, right? And notice things that they've probably spent all of their lives trying to avoid. So EMDR, you have to be able to do that, right? And tolerable activation is really difficult for people with complex trauma because their insides are filled with highly combustible things. And even if you can do all of that, there's another core thing in EMDR therapy that is simply a requirement, which is that whatever the difficult stuff is, it has to connect with existing positive stuff, meaning some part of you has to already know the right answer to the trauma. And the problem with complex trauma is that your childhood will spin you around so much that you may not have much. information in you that's different than the learning in the trauma. And I think what we're probably going to talk about a lot as we're talking about is that we heal across prediction error, we heal across experiential mismatch, right? And with EMDR, with people with complex trauma, sometimes there's just not a lot of positive stuff there for the difficult stuff to link up with. So EMDR can be amazing with people with complex trauma, but it requires usually a pretty long prep. With some people, when they're phobic of slowing down or phobic of being present or aren't in their bodies enough to notice, because EMDR is a somatic psychotherapy. So I wouldn't say that wouldn't say that my interest in Flash came entirely from the difficulties in working with EMDR therapy, but it has turned out to be a very powerful solution to the fact that doing EMDR with people with really, really severe trauma is just a difficult clinical task. And what we find is that in most cases, Flash is not. Flash is a pretty simple clinical task. I describe EMDR as like it's like a 1 meter hurdle. And Flash is more like a 6-inch hurdle, right? It's a much smaller.
Right. So for clients who are already starting with way more difficulty and way more kind of baggage holding them down, it's going to be much easier to actually engage in the Flash therapy process.
Yeah, we can start Flash sooner. Because with EMDR therapy, it's a somatic psychotherapy. You have to be in your body enough to notice. And if you're not in your body at all, if you've survived by not slowing down, being present and noticing, it can take many months for us to be able to do EMDR with you well. And if you are missing a lot of the adaptive information, it can take many more months for us to try to develop that with you before EMDR can be successful. Yeah.
One other thing that you mentioned is obviously, so in EMDR, we want to connect people's positive beliefs and use those to kind of challenge the negative beliefs that have developed or been reinforced through trauma. But that assumes that they've had experiences that have generated and reinforced positive beliefs that can counteract that. How is it kind of possible to engage in a trauma therapy modality where we can heal trauma without those positive experiences on hand?
So in EMDR, it's not. But in Flash, the positive experiences that we're connecting to are your right now affective state, which is being generated by the pleasant or funny or distracting YouTube video. So it is true that we need a discrepancy of information. In EMDR, the discrepancy is in your information system, where the difficult stuff is connecting with other information inside you. In Flash, the difficult stuff is encountering an experience in your nervous system, which is showing your nervous system, your predictive nervous system, that difficulty is not happening right here, right now. So that's the mismatch. It's a mismatch in expectation. It's a mismatch in prediction.
In a lot of other traumatic therapy modalities, we rely on principles of things like desensitization, habituation, right, as healing mechanisms. That's what we use to describe how people heal from trauma. From my reading into Four Blinks, you talk about something called memory reconsolidation theory and use this as an explanator for why it works to heal. What is memory reconsolidation theory and how is it different to other trauma processing models?
Yeah. So there are multiple lenses, kind of positions that we might look at what's going on in Flash. And one of those is through Bruce Acker's understanding of memory reconsolidation. And one of the things Bruce Acker says is that in order to heal, you need to activate something and then ask the client to sit with an experience that disconfirms or is really, really different from the expectation in the bad memory. So memories have beliefs built into them, right? So if it's, I can't handle this, and then we have them sit with an experience where they can handle this, So part of the way Flash is conceptualized is through that lens, that kind of memory, Bruce Ecker's memory reconsolidation lens, which is a kind of more practical lens to the broader view, which is predictive processing. And predictive processing is it's a if we think about it, it's kind of a very broad metaphor about what the nervous system is doing. So, predictive processing is a very top level view of what our nervous system is doing and how it's organized. And what predictive processing does, and we can talk about how it's really compatible with what I just said related to Bruce Ecker, and it's also compatible with almost any psychotherapy that is transformational. So, what predictive processing suggests is that our nervous system is always trying to construct our reality. It's always trying to predict what's about to happen next. And the vast majority of those predictions happen beneath our awareness, right? And they're things that, prediction and prediction error are required for us to move, to navigate the world, to perceive, to learn, to gain information. I mean, prediction and prediction error are required for us to experience, to really experience and construct and update our reality of the world constantly. So from that point of view, the brain is in a black box. It doesn't know what is going on. It's making inferences about, it's making guesses as it's constructing our world. So part of what we're doing is we're bringing in Flash, we'll talk about what it is in a moment, but we're bringing little bitty tiny pieces of the memory into working memory at a time, pushing it out of awareness, and then we're having you have purposeful experiences back to back to back that help your predictive mind realize that piece of the memory that we just brought into working memory. Because once you bring a piece of the memory into working memory, your nervous system has to start making predictions about it. Okay? So that little piece of the memory we brought into working memory, we're going to show your nervous system that it's not happening right here, right now. Because we're giving it an experience that's demonstrating through our exteroceptive, meaning our sensory system, right, our outwardly looking system, which is about 20% of what the predictions that our nervous system's making is based on, and about 80% of everything we've ever been through in this type of context. So clients do almost all of this work in a very pleasant, positive scene in which their nervous system is having an experience which is shaping what is in working memory. So what that means is we're healing experientially. And it's quite literally what Bruce Ecker's asking us to do. Although we can talk about Bruce Ecker as a little bit of a challenge, because what we're doing is we're activating a tiny piece of something, and then we're having experiences back to back to back that demonstrate that experience isn't happening right here, right now. So we're leveraging prediction error in the service of healing.
So where typically someone would activate a traumatic memory, it would then activate pattern recognition and predictive models of, well, okay, based on this, terrible things are about to happen to me. But instead we sit with and we engage in experiences that disconfirm that prediction, and we kind of rewire our pattern recognition.
Correct. And if we think about any other, transformational trauma therapy, there's prediction error in there too, right? EMDR, we've talked about the way the difficult stuff, there's plenty in the beginning of an EMDR session that's very consistent and confirming of the expectation and the bad memory. And then a pivot happens, and then difficult stuff starts linking up with the adaptive information. So it's prediction error, right? It's prediction error. And in EMDR, for instance, people will say things like, almost just they will shock themselves by saying statements like, oh, I was just a kid. Right? They were like, and you and I know, of course you were. You know what I mean? We knew going in that, but that realization is the difficult stuff connecting with the already existing adaptive information. So there are many, many ways that we can, my kind of take is that humans heal typically one way, right? We heal this way. We heal across prediction error. We heal across experiential mismatch. So those of us who do parts work, from this conceptualization is parts work, is parts of you having experiences with other parts of you that are different than the expectation in the bad memory, which can allow new learning, which can allow new constructs, which can allow new, it can allow healing. So again, we heal across experiential mismatch. Psychedelics, same thing, yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that, so after you go through flash therapy with a client, right, you work through multiple different traumas, they no longer feel like these traumas are activating to them. Do you find that some of the negative core beliefs that formed and were reinforced by these traumas have changed? Or do you find that after these have been kind of desensitized and they're no longer distressing, you then need to engage in something like a cognitive processing therapy or a CBT to kind of deliberately work on shifting these negative core beliefs?
My insistence, and I'm certain about it, is that when you do flash well, memories will fully adaptively resolve. And when they do, how you think about the world and yourself changes. So, Flash doesn't ask about cognitions going in because we're trying not to activate those things. But in every transformational trauma therapy, how you think about yourself and the world shifts. So Flash is not desensitizing. There are things we might do to desensitize a trauma. Flash fully adaptively, and you do it well. Now, the original version of Flash was designed to take heat out of memory so that you could clean up the debris in EMDR therapy. But it's no longer controversial to suggest that Flash can fully adaptively resolve memories. So part of what I'm saying is that how you use it shapes what you're going to get. And if you're only using it to take heat out, then you're not going to keep going and fully resolve it.
So a couple of things you mentioned. One was if Flash is done well, this is the outcome. If Flash is done poorly, this is the outcome. If you use Flash only to take the heat out, this is the outcome. How can Flash be done in a way where it is done poorly, or how can it be done in a way where it doesn't reach full adaptation? Like, what are the pitfalls clinicians are running into?
Well, even if you use Flash with the intent of desensitizing, okay, that's good. Desensitization is good. But with procedures like there is in the 4-blinks version of Flash, we can clean out all of the distress in the memory. Because we can do Flash until the client says, oh, I feel a whole lot better, and then just go, okay, well, that's the end of our session, right? Or we can have procedures where the client glances at the memory, and then when they have trouble finding distress, they walk through each microsecond of the bad memory, digesting any little bit of debris, right? So that very last step, which comes from the Ricky Greenwald version of Flash, by the way, kind of playing the video of it, really does clear out any debris on any channel and results in the full resolution of the memory.
Right. So you work through the memory, it feels clean, but then you put it through kind of like a second wash by going frame by frame again.
Exactly. It's kind of like the metaphor is, imagine the memory is in the scary room, right? And we're on the other side of the door. When we're first engaging, we just really quickly peek in and stuff flies out at us, and we kind of process that stuff. After a little bit of time, we can kind of hold the door open a little bit, and it gets harder to find what's distressing. And then after a little more time, we can stand in the door and not see what's distressing, and we have to metaphorically walk into the room.
I really like that metaphor, yeah.
Look under the cushions, look behind the couch, and usually there's something behind the couch, like every good or bad horror movie you've ever seen. There's usually something, and it pops up, and then we process that little piece. So one of the core things about Flash is because we're only getting a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of memory at a time, we're not processing the memory as a whole. We're processing only a tiny little bit of it at a time, right? So I describe a memory as like a beanbag that sits in your brain, and we just bring a bean of it into awareness at a time. And then we push it out of awareness, but we just put it in working memory because you just activated it. So even though we're not right now focusing on it, it's in working memory. And then your brain has to make predictions about it. So we're processing this one little bean, one little micro slice of the memory at a time. But the memory as a whole stays in your brain where trauma is. Yeah.
So obviously what you've based your modality on is the Flash model, but you've created your own kind of version, an offshoot called 4 Blinks Flash Therapy. Why 4 Blinks? Where does that name come from?
Well, when you develop something, you have to name it something, don't you?
Sure.
And there was an awareness that you could blink 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Okay. 3 blinks was a trademark. So I wanted, just for memory, I wanted there to be a number in it, and then I wanted there to be a descriptor of what I was having the client do. Right? So 2 blinks sounded too short. You know what I mean? 1 blink was trademarked or something. So if I had to name it again, I'd name it something different. But it is essentially a version of Flash because I need to give proper acknowledgement that Phil Manfield, an EMDR therapist, developed the original version of Flash. And Flash is a combination of microactivation and lots of small experiences, positive experiences with a pleasant scene. So that makes it Flash, meaning if it has wheels and it has a steering wheel and it has a brake and it has a transmission, it's a car, right? But there's all kinds of makes of cars and models of cars. So this is a version of Flash that really did, I think, need to be developed for multiple reasons, including the fact that Phil Manfield, when he developed it as a tool to be used with EMDR therapy. And you had to be trained in EMDR therapy or some other transformational trauma therapy to be trained in Flash. And that sounded pretty silly to me. Plus, it seemed right out of the gate that that this is a way that humans can heal. And if this is a way that humans can heal, we need to find ways to do it really, really well. Because in the original Flash training that I took, I resolved multiple memories back to back in a 20-minute practicum that I was planning to spend whole sessions on in EMDR therapy. And I was like, wow, isn't that curious that this desensitization method resulted, and I was an EMDR therapist, so I know what full adaptive reprocessing looks like because I've seen it thousands of times up close. And I'm like, wow, this really fully resolved that memory with a positive belief that I feel about myself very strongly. I'm experiencing, all parts of me are experiencing that memory as over. I can play it and it doesn't show up in my body anywhere. As a matter of fact, I feel the resilience from the resolution of that memory. Right? So all of that was present with Flash. Then I had to see my clients do it nearly 80 times in a row before I realized, whoa, this is not desensitization, and there are ways to do it that fully adaptively resolve a memory almost every single session while engaging in a really pleasant state. Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you've seen people, whether that's in supervision or other colleagues or people attempting to use Flash or 4 Blinks version of Flash, what are some ways that you've seen them do it where they do things kind of wrong or they don't do things fully? Like, what are some of the mistakes that people make?
The problem is every form of therapy has its intuition. And most of the people that I've trained are EMDR therapists who are really comfortable with there being a whole lot of distress in the client's body. And they're comfortable with a lot of activation. So Flash works because we're bringing only a tiny piece of the memory into working memory, not the whole memory into working memory, right? So microactivation's the hardest part. So I think most people struggle when they allow the client to activate too much, and they don't have very good strategies to help them stop from activating so much.
What are some of the strategies that you think people should be better at implementing to stop that activation?
Look at the memory much faster. So if you activate, you have resources to get the, to get that distress out of your body. You have resources to, but then next time I need you to look at the memory 100 times faster.
Open and close that door.
Yeah. So again, what I'll do is I'll have clients do this. I'll say, way too slow, do it faster. And they'll go like that. Way too slow, do it faster, right? So we're practicing that. So the way you manage distress in Flash is you look at the memory faster, much, much faster next time. So if in the memory, someone's father is, you're so stupid, right? We're just getting the, yep. Just one syllable, one little piece. And does it make sense that parts of you don't like that? We're not used to that. That's not how we normally do trauma. Right? So this can be a little bit difficult approach to teach when people have very strong attachments to what healing is and how you have to do it. So it's non-intuitive, but if you can do it, it's incredibly powerful.
On that note, how do you ensure that the traumatic memory is activated enough for us to actually work with it, reconsolidate our memory, but not so much that it is interfering with the healing or becoming overwhelming?
Yeah, if you play too much of the memory and it's really showing up in your body, remember your predictive brain is concluding that that's not happening because it's not happening in your body and in your external sensory system. So so it's tough to microactivate. It is legitimately tough to microactivate. So I'm not sure I answered your question. Restate it.
So how do we ensure that the traumatic memory is activated enough? Like, is there such a thing as too little microactivation kind of a thing?
Yes. Here's metaphorically what we're trying to do. Imagine a hot skillet. Okay, we get our finger wet. What we want to do is, does that make sense? Now, if I'm just pointing at it, that's not activating enough, is it? If I hold my finger on the skillet, it's going to burn me, right? So again, the way we manage this is by managing time. Okay, so I need you to activate. The language in Flash is lightning fast. Think about the bad memory. Whatever's distressing in this moment, catch it, contain it, send it far, far away. Let me know when it's gone. So I need you to find the first little 1/10 of an ounce of distress, and then we're gonna again. I need you to find the right, but not play it. You're so stupid, right? We need to not, right? That's difficult. We have to practice that. And we need to let clients know that I'm going to do everything I can do, and I need you to do everything you can do, not to activate this memory. We're trying to microactivate it, and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like what we're used to. But what we're used to nearly never results in healing. What's intuitive doesn't work. We'll do what's intuitive forever, and we'll die with our trauma in our brain. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we open the door, but we have to wait for something scary to fly out before we close the door.
Yeah, or you have to search for something scary to come, or difficult, or challenging, or frustrating, or maybe it just shows up a little bit in your body, but some activation on some part of it needs to come, yeah. So we're microactivating. We're not anti-activating. Does that make sense? We
Sure.
some accessing of it. is necessary. Yeah, some emotional accessing of it is necessary.
Yeah.
But we want to get such a tiny piece that it doesn't flood your nervous system with predictions about what might be happening right here, right now.
Right, because predictions can come from, well, two negative experiences. If you're actually experiencing something with your external sensory perceptions, right, you see something bad happening, okay, bad. But also if you're somatically feeling bad things happening, that's also
Yeah.
feeding that
And
prediction.
one of the things we know about the predictive brain is it doesn't have to just prepare for what's actually happening. If you have trauma, the predictive brain also is going to predict the predictions that you're going to have when old trauma comes into working memory. And why is it going to do that? Because you've had 75 prior experiences of what happens when that memory comes into working memory. So your mind, it sounds a little bit recursive, but your mind may make predictions about the predictions you're about to make and may preemptively flood your body. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty common experience, though. Like, we as therapists would encounter this a lot where people are very hesitant to even begin working on trauma. Like, you'll have people come in and be like, I want to work on my anxiety. I've got trauma, but I don't want to talk about it because they're predicting that if they begin to work on it, they'll begin to get overwhelmed.
And this is yeah, an example I use is this is like chapstick, for like dry lips, and I'll say if this is like a button that every time the client has touched it, it shocked them with 30,000 volts. So people that come to us know what happens when trauma gets activated. They've had many, many experiences of touching this and something bad happens. And then here I am saying, hey, let's touch this. It'll be okay. They have parts of them that are like, I don't know that. That's not my experience. And my experience, my predictive brain is constructing the prediction in my body right here that might not be a safe thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I recall watching a Huberman Lab episode where he was talking about attention focus and the use of blinking to deliberately kind of center in focus. And he described this mechanism wherein if you blink purposefully and kind of like take a screenshot, a snapshot of what's going on, it kind of like refocuses you in on the present moment and kind of breaks your present moment awareness into what just happened and what is now. And that sounds kind of similar to what you're describing here, where you break a pleasant experience into two, and now you have two positive memories. You blink again, three positive memories.
There may be something going on in also in this version of Flash, you don't have to blink. If what we're doing is disrupting your pleasant scene, you don't have to blink. Blinks are just an efficient way to do that. What you can do is if you're watching a YouTube video, you can stare at an object on a shelf for half a second and then go right back. That also functions as a blink. You can clap. It is a motor movement designed to obstruct your focus on your pleasant experience, and it generates a new experience. Right? So, and it processes just as fast. I have multiple clients with eye irritation issues who can process just fine without blinking and Flash.
So as long as you do something that's disrupting and breaking the positive experience into multiple chunks, because then you have one. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. Yeah, you're.
It sounds to me like we have one micro slice of a negative memory on one side of the experience, and then you kind of pile up a whole bunch of stones of positive experiences, and it's kind of like 6-1, the ratio tilts positive.
And it's even more tilted on the side of positive because that little piece that we activated, we just pushed it. We pushed it out of awareness. Okay. But it's in working memory. How do I know it's in working memory? Because I just touched it and put in my container. But I'm pushing it out of awareness so that no part of me is thinking about it, feeling it, trying to make sense of it, trying to see what else it connects to. We're not doing any of that. We're trying to process. What we're processing is what we just put into the container.
So a part of a part of Four Blinks, right, we open up a microslice of a memory and then we catch and contain it. We catch and contain any feelings and thoughts, right? We put them in a container and we push them out of our awareness. But I've long been taught throughout my life, and even in culture, we talk about that suppressing negative memories or trying to push them away is unhelpful, right? By pushing them away, they come back even stronger. But obviously in Four Blinks, we're kind of deliberately containering them, locking them up, and sending these things far away. How is this any different to just trying to ignore or suppress uncomfortable mental happenings? And why does this work to assist in healing?
Putting something in a container feels like avoidance. But in Flash, what you just put in the container is what you just brought into working memory. And one of the incorrect assumptions about healing is that you have to be staring at it to heal from it. And I don't think you do. One of the things we've learned about working memory is you bring something into working memory, it stays there for a while. And it becomes pliable. You can do something with it. But in Flash, to do something with it, we need you to have an experience that is different than what some part of your nervous system is expecting you to be happening right here, right now. So it feels like avoidance, but what we put in the container is the very part of the memory that's about to get fully or partially processed.
Is it correct to say then that in some way we are avoiding it with our awareness, but we are still in contact with it on a more kind of unconscious level?
Exactly.
And working on it?
Because what you put into working memory, your nervous system has to make predictions about. Because your brain is in a black box and all it knows is that information has been brought into focus and I need to do something with it.
Right, so our focus is avoiding it, but we are actually still in contact with it because of how recently it was activated.
Correct. So even though we're not looking at it, it's in working memory, and that's the piece of it that is about to be fully or partially digested the next time, that we're in our pleasant scene. And I understand there are approaches to psychotherapy where the center of the pathology is avoidance. And this is a little bit of an aside, but I can't not go there. As an EMDR therapist, when you see things like fully adaptively resolve, I don't think we should be being too harsh when people avoid, when we have very few really powerful ways for people to heal, right? So also, every client with complex trauma that I've ever worked with may try to avoid, but they're swimming in their trauma all day, every day, right? So it's not like, I don't know. I think in language, we can be very, very judgy toward avoidance. With people with complex trauma, avoidance really is what allows them to function on many days. Yeah. But what we're doing, it feels like avoidance in Flash, but it's not. Yeah, it feels like it's quite literally how we work. The thing that feels like avoidance, pushing that out of awareness, is putting it in exactly the right spot where it's about to get processed. Because if it's right here in working memory, in focus, it's in working memory, it was right here in direct focus, do you know what's going to happen? I'm going to start interacting with it. I'm going to start having thoughts about it and other feelings about it. And then my nervous system's going to have to make predictions about that content that's coming into awareness. Yeah.
In ACT therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, there's this metaphor that they often use where you'll grab something and be like, this is your distress. And imagine pushing, if the distress is right up in your face, it's going to be very, very overwhelming. It's taking up your whole center of view. Or if you try to push it away and you hold it away, you can see more of what's going on. But, obviously it's still taking effort and connection in order to do that. It kind of sounds to me like this act of containering and pushing away is actually doing this, where your working memory is still expending energy on holding this in awareness because in order to push something away, you need to interact with it in some way. But the difference is it doesn't stay just out there the whole time. By engaging in these positive experiences, you're kind of disintegrating the distress that you're holding out there in the first place. That's how it's sounding to me. What is your thoughts on that?
No, that makes sense. Again, what's important is that we bring a tiny piece of it into working memory that doesn't have a whole lot of that almost like your nervous system's like, ooh, right? It almost doesn't know what to do with this, but there's a part of, and then we push it out of awareness. One of the things that the reason why this version of Flash has an explicit container is because of what we know about complex trauma. So a relatively healthy person can activate a trauma here, pivot away from it, and like a match, it will largely self-extinguish. A relatively healthy person can activate trauma, pivot away from it, go in a pleasant scene, and that activation is largely going to self-extinguish just from the pivoting away from it. Okay? People with complex trauma, you activate and pivot away from it and engage in something. Many people with complex trauma, that little match is going to set the trash can on fire. It's going to set the curtains on fire. It's going to set the room and in the house. And then half of Chicago in the 1870s will be burned down the moment you turn back to check on it, right? So the things that, from a Flash perspective, built around this Acker and this predictive processing lens. So it's got a very specific understanding of what's going on and how we're healing in it. And everything in the other versions that doesn't make sense from that memory reconsolidation or predictive processing lens is taken out. And the things that are helpful with people with complex trauma, like the containering, because putting something in a container and sending it away sends a message. I have clients do this with their hand. We send it away. It sends the message, I'm not thinking about this right now. I'm not feeling this right now. I'm not attaching to it in any way. I'm not trying to make any type of logic or sense or reason out of any of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing I've noticed is if we don't do the containering, if we do try to pivot towards like a calm scene, the calm scene gets infected essentially by whatever we were just interfering with as well, right? It'll be like, okay, now pivot. Okay, it's the beach. Oh, isn't the beach awful because my family's not here with me, right? It'll be,
Yeah. Remember, the part of the resources that we do if there is a little bit of activation is vacuuming distress out of the body, and somatic practitioners may not like that, but it's if distress in the body is confirming and we're trying to have a disconfirming experience. So if you're in your calm scene and the trauma is alive in your nervous system, then the disconfirmation and the confirmation are going to mix, and Flash may. I think the reason other versions of Flash often end with a distress at about 2 or 3 is because they're not attending to that. The goal is to desensitize rather than to fully reprocess. So the 4-Blinks version of Flash has mechanisms built in designed to promote full adaptive processing rather than just desensitizing. Because I've seen people do Flash in remarkably poor ways, and you know what often happens? The memory moves in an adaptive direction. Even when you do Flash in really, really bad ways, it rarely fully resolves, but it often gets better. And I'm not one to make the perfect the enemy of the good, but if there are ways of doing it on the front end well, let's do that.
Okay, so now I'm terrified of doing Flash and 4-Blinks in the wrong way. So tell me, what are some terrible ways to do it that I can avoid doing?
I would say one of the things that's a really one of the things that people do is they allow the client to activate too much and don't do anything about it. Right? And I jokingly say, I told someone in my life recently, I said, oh, there's no crying in Flash. And they're like, what? I'm like, no, Flash. Now, if grief comes, we can pause and you can cry and you can have that grief response because trauma work opens up grief around grief targets. But Flash generally is a catharsis-less psychotherapy, right? So I don't want, and again, since Freud and Breuer 130 years ago, we've told you that you got to come to therapy and like have a certain catharsis. You got to like, you have to catharsis that stuff.
Gotta let it out, yeah.
You got to like let it out, yeah. And I think what one of the things Flash teaches us is that we heal experientially. Right? Is that when we heal, we heal the same way we're wounded, and we heal the same way we resource, and we heal the same way we learn. We heal experientially. And Flash is just one way to do that. There are lots of ways to do that, but they all involve experiential healing. Even in ACT, even in that imagine this is your trigger and then push it away, right? That's disconfirmation. When you didn't know you could push it away, when you didn't know that you could have that perspective. And now you can see it with a little bit of distance when you've always felt it right here. That sounds also like what we're up to, like we're trying to help people have experiences with their trauma that is different, that are different than the expectation in the trauma.
That makes sense. Are there particular types of trauma that you find it's more or less effective for?
What I do say is we need to start with small things first, because Flash is a practice and it takes a while for people to get good at what we're asking them to do. But by the fourth or fifth session, the client has this down. I don't care what we work on. So Flash works, and again, when you do it well, I've seen this thousands of times. Flash works really well for attachment trauma. It works really well with recent relational trauma. It works great for childhood sexual abuse. It works great for natural disasters, right? Flash, there are very few types of trauma, okay, very few types of trauma that I can do other transformational therapies with that I can't also do Flash with. So anything I might target in EMDR therapy, I can target in Flash. If the client is prepared to do both, and we're working on like medical trauma from anesthesia, for instance, or if we're working on pre-verbal trauma, where you don't have a memory to glance at all, I might do EMDR, but that's not where we're starting anyway. We're not starting with those memories anyway. And again, the utility in Flash is to just start trauma work second, third, or fourth session. Start actually treating the presenting issues sooner. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. For clinicians who have already been trained in EMDR or trained in Flash, or maybe clinicians who just come from, a CBT, PET kind of trauma treating background, what would they need to know or shift in their thinking in order to adopt this 4-Blinks version of Flash?
Yeah. I would say that everything you currently do can sit on your toolbox, like a tool. It can sit on your toolbox, and Flash can sit on your toolbox as another tool. So you don't need to do anything different in any of your other approaches. It's just Flash is a different tool. So how you use that tool depends upon, the requirements of that tool. And Flash, I train people in 3 hours how to do Flash with a practicum. So most of the time, people are able to use Flash pretty successfully after that 3-hour training. The way we train people in EMDR here in the States, it's a 50-hour training.
Yeah.
With training and consultation. And even then, a lot of people are like, I don't know how to do this, right? So, and again, I've trained, somewhere around 20,000 people the last 4 years in this version of Flash. And I've done almost all of those trainings for free, right? So 3-hour trainings every 2 weeks for 4 years.
Yeah, I did notice that. So with a lot of this is something that people who aren't psychotherapists might not know, but a lot of the training that we do to improve our skills isn't from our university. It's the courses and it's the continued education that we voluntarily do once we're out there practicing and working in the real world. But a lot of these trainings are really expensive. My EMDR training that I did was, a couple $1,000s. There's all kinds of trainings like the IFS training that's several $1,000s. Like these are not cheap, but all of your material is out there for free. Why did you make that choice?
Yeah. So when people ask me that, I often turn it around and I say, well, once you see what Flash is, why aren't you training people? Do you know what I mean? Why aren't you training? Because if Flash is what we suggest that it is a way to fully adaptively process trauma with very little distress and with remarkably little chance of the client decompensating and having a really bad outcome or needing to be hospitalized or those things. This is something we need to do. This is something that just as humans, right? So if as trauma therapists, we understand that what's wrong with us is this huge, the largest public health crisis that's been ongoing for thousands of years is our kind of accumulated trauma, right? Our accumulated personal and cultural trauma. So this may be how we rescue ourselves from ourselves, right? This is, so I'm pretty clearly on a mission to train as many people as I can. Because every therapist that does this is going to work with hundreds of people over their careers, right? And that's very, very, very powerful work. So I don't own this, and to be honest, Phil Manfield doesn't own this, right? So if this is a way that humans can heal, it's been with us for as long as we've been human. Right? If this is a way that humans can heal through all the bad wars, through all the bad moms, through all the flu and epidemic weekends, through all the natural disasters, we've had the ability to heal ourselves relatively easily and in ways that are deeply transformational. We don't have time to gatekeep this, right? We don't have time. There are people in parts of the world who are never going to resonate with EMDR therapy, who can find a positive scene in their own culture, in their own environment, and they can use that to heal themselves. In a psychotherapy that I can teach you in 3 hours, right? So why not do that? Does that make sense? I mean, every therapist that's excited about something is a busy person. And this is one of the things I'm excited about.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions about Forblink's version of Flash that you've encountered while you've been developing it and training it and using it with clients?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest obstacles in Flash generally is there's not enough distress in it for people to believe it's real.
Okay.
We're too attached. And when I do trainings with EMDR therapists, this comes up and people are like, yeah, there's not enough distress in it. And if you're a therapist that believes that, I'm just going to ask you to check yourself. Right? Because why does there have to be a certain amount of distress for you to feel like something's legitimate? Does that make sense?
No pain, no gain, right? Isn't that the mantra that we live by?
Yeah, there's no pain, there's no gain. And it's also you got to feel it to heal it. But our clients with complex trauma have been feeling it for 45 years. What they need to do is they need to feel it in a way that's different than how they've always felt it. So when people come to therapy and they trauma dump, very often they're feeling it the way they always feel it. They're just feeling it in the context of an attuned relationship, which can be helpful, but is very rarely transformational. I've been trauma dumped by the same client 50 times with the same memory.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And it feels just as volatile the 49th time as it was the first. Right? So yeah, that's one of the things is that and that's why I encourage people to do Flash themselves. Flash is really good self-administered, and once you've done it yourself a few times, then the evidence is the evidence. If you're a trauma therapist, you know what a fully resolved memory looks like because you've seen it. And in your EMDR trainings or other trainings, IFS trainings, you know what it feels like because you've experienced it. And that memory feels completely different than it did before you worked on it. So what I kind of need to do is get, to train people in this and then get them to do it and have the experiential learning so that they can see themselves. Yeah.
While you've been developing this and training people, have you faced skepticism from other professionals in the trauma space? And how do you kind of handle that and respond to that?
I don't really have time for that. I'm not trying to get invited anywhere. I don't like, I don't, I don't care. You know what I mean? Sometimes people will approach me with questions and sometimes, and I'll give them my opinion, but I don't really need anything right now from anybody to do what I do. So if they're Flash skeptics, you can bring me that skepticism and I'll reply as best I can to your question, but I don't need anybody. Do you know what I mean? I don't need anybody to I don't need anybody's approval to do what I do. Flash is not trademarked, right? So I'm allowed to have my version. Right, I give appropriate attribution to the people that kind of serve as the developers and founders and stuff for it, but I don't I don't need anything from anybody. Having said that, I am planning to form a nonprofit. Right? And I'm planning for that nonprofit to be research focused. I intend to do Flash research. And then there's probably going to be criticism of that research. Again, I don't care. This is how things progress. Right? But I think for Flash to be used in community mental health clinics all over the world, there's going to need to be more research. And my intention is to use the little bit of money that I've been making from Flash to fund the foundation of the nonprofit, to form the IRB, and to do this research. So that's my late 2025, 26 project is to do that.
That's excellent. Yeah, it'd be good to have data on it that we can present to bodies and.
There's growing data all over the world on it, right? And again, some people say Flash is an evidence-based psychotherapy, and it may be, but it's not evidence-based by the people who decide.
Yeah.
Governmentally and institutionally what an evidence base is. So the Veterans Administration here in the United States, Flash is not evidence based. It requires a lot more, a lot more evidence than
It's about the tier of evidence, the construction quality of the research design, the amount of research that is there, right? Yeah. When you've been developing it and using 4Blinks, what has surprised you the most during this whole process?
What has surprised me the most? I think probably the ease with which it can be used as an approach to psychotherapy. Right? Is that that's where my next writing projects are going to be, is Flash as an approach to psychotherapy. Because if Flash resolves memories, right? And most of what people see us for is the aftermath of deeply invalidating human experiences. So if Flash resolves memories relatively easily, it's got to become a psychotherapy. It has to. You can't name any other technique right? That fully adaptively resolves a memory 95% of the time in a single session that doesn't become a psychotherapy, right? But people have been so used to Flash being EMDR's little redheaded cousin, right? And just, using EMDR with it and going back and forth, but that I think that's a missed opportunity, is to really think about Flash as an approach to psychotherapy that can go global. Yeah.
Nice. How do you support clients who are highly avoidant while you're engaging in 4Blinks Flash therapy?
Yeah. So if they're completely avoidant, they're probably not seeing me, right? There's something, right? There's something that's bringing them in. But most men, at least here, right, the way I was raised, is we're going to give you anger, and we're going to give you sports joy, and we're going to shame and humiliate all of the other emotions out of you.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're going to call that strength, right? We're going to call that, like, what being strong means. So one of the things I think that one of Flash's really big selling points is that it works really, really well with people who are pretty avoidant, who may be able to lightly touch something, but may really struggle slowing down, being present, and having a fire in their body. Right? So first responders, veterans do really, really well in Flash. And my clients with pretty significant dissociative features do really well in Flash, because their parts are worried about the part system becoming unstable, right? The parts are worried about not just what they might feel, but what other parts might feel. And then if we do a little bit of prep, we do enough prep to where I can get some understanding of the client system can get some understanding of me, then we're all on agreement. We're going to do everything we can not to activate much. And all of our effort is spent on that, and then just being in a pleasant scene. So I think I don't need you to strongly feel in Flash. We're trying to process the trauma as information rather than as distress. We're trying to process the trauma as information rather than as distress. Okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a different paradigm.
Got a question from one of my psychologists here in Australia who knew I was going to be interviewing you. They were wanting to ask, when you're working with a child doing Flash and they begin to reprocess the memory and kind of stay in it rather than just going for the micro slice, how do you support that and how do you help them with that?
Number one, the 4Blinks version of Flash has 4 resources built into it, right? And we don't do processing until those resources are in place. So we have grounding. We have Shop Vac, which is a vacuum cleaner to get the stress out of the body. We have our calm, pleasant, disconfirming YouTube video, right? Or if I'm working with a kid, it's the video game they're watching, right? And then the last resource is container. So we have these 4 resources. So if a client is getting activated, the only correct answer is immediately stop and deal with that activation. Okay. And then if they're really struggling, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give them a beanbag. I have 50 of these in my office. And what we're going to do is I'm going to have them throw the beanbag in the air and only think about the memory when the beanbag is in the air. And then what's difficult, what is in the memory that's difficult, you're going to associate with the beanbag, and we're going to throw it across the room toward the basket, the wicker basket across the room where the bean bags had been stored in, right? So again, microactivation container, right? Throw it across the room. So when clients are struggling with microactivation, that means one of 2 things. They need help with microactivation, or that means we're working on too big of a memory too soon. And we pivot from that bigger memory to one that's more tolerable while they're getting used to microactivation.
And that comes back to what you were saying earlier, right, about training people on how Flash actually works. You start with some easier, less distressing memories first.
Absolutely. Maybe we don't start with our skillet at 400 degrees. Does that make sense? Maybe we start with a warm skillet first, right? So that you can practice that, right? You can practice lightly touching it without not touching it at all and without putting your finger on it long enough to burn it. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about using 4Blinks and Flash with neurodivergent clients, people on the autism spectrum, people with ADHD, because one thing that comes to my mind and a potential difficulty is, for example, with containering. Put in a container, push it out of your awareness. That's kind of a difficult, kind of an abstract sentence even to wrap your mind around, right? So with this specific example of containering, or when you're working with neurodiverse clients in general, what has been your experience? Have there been any adjustments that you've figured out to make? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So this is one with containment, because we just outsourced the container to an actual object that we're throwing across the room. We can also do this, right? Even just doing this after we microactivate and we say we're just going to push it out of our awareness, even this is a motor movement designed to send the message. We're not thinking about it. We're not feeling it. We're not noticing it. We're not ruminating about it, right? So one of the really powerful things to understand about many forms of neurodivergence, including ADHD and autism, ADHD first, it's simply not true that most people with ADHD can't focus. They can focus on salient things. And we're spending 90+% of our session focusing on a deeply engaging YouTube video of a video game or puppies wrestling or funny things kids say or anything. And if it's someone with ADHD, it's probably not going to be a slow, relaxing beach where the waves are coming in. It's probably going to be a comedy. It's probably going to be something really fast, really engaging, really salient, maybe a video game, maybe, I don't know, anything. So that's a lot of what Flash is. That's giving you the disconfirmation, that's shifting the stuff. People with ADHD absolutely can microactivate with a little bit of practice. Okay. People on the autism spectrum generally have something, not everybody, most of them have something that they're deeply fascinated by, something that lights up their dopamine system, even if from an outsider perspective, it's bizarre, like whatever that thing is, right? That's your pleasant scene. That's your video. We're going to find that thing on YouTube, right? Whatever it is. So many people that we're seeing as clients on the autism spectrum can think about a memory quickly, can go like this, and then can be in a pleasant scene. Where their nervous system and brain can make predictions about what's happening right here, right now, in my sensory system and in my whole interoceptive state. So, and I don't want to say, I mean, because I'm an EMDR trainer, I don't want to say that my clients with ADHD do better in Flash than they do in EMDR therapy, but I have plenty of evidence that that's true. I have plenty of evidence that they've resolved things in Flash that they would have really struggled to resolve in EMDR therapy. Some of them, at least. Right?
At least anecdotally, from your experiences, you found that with people with ADHD, because they're engaging in engaging videos or engaging actions that they enjoy, obviously they can pay attention to that. And when you're microactivating a memory, it's only for a split second.
Yeah, and there are therapists all over the world, right? Thousands of them who are doing Flash with kids and doing Flash with people with ADHD and doing Flash with people with autism all day long. And the feedback I get is that it's an incredibly helpful tool that sits on the toolbox. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Thomas. This is really interesting.
Thank you.
Bunch of questions. I'm sure people who are interested in the space will enjoy this video. Very niche topic, I feel. So But I found that I think that this is going to be really interesting to people who have trained in Flash or trained in other trauma modalities and want to learn more about it. So thank you so much for doing this interview. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.